back to the Basement Gun Shop. Over the last couple days, I've had a couple more fan requests, and so I'm answering one of the fan requests now. The request was for what can you do to a 1911 to tune it up, make it a little bit better, make it a little sexier, whatever, for without having to go to a gunsmith. So I thought about this, and there's a limited number of things you can do without actually having to take your pistol to a smith. Being that it was really limited, I thought just to cover all the bases, I would include some of the things a smith does with a gun when they get it in to be tuned or to be accurized or just upgraded. Okay? So I've got two 1911s on the bench right here, so I am going to reposition the camera and we'll be right back with that. Obviously you can see we have a 1911 on the bench and it is in pieces parts. So I kind of broke the parts down into what can you upgrade without the help of a gunsmith, and then what can you upgrade with minimal tools, and then what can you upgrade with a whole lot of tools, and some specialty tools at that. So let's talk about no tools first. Let me set the spring out of the way here. First things first, grips. Grips are always something that you can change on a gun, especially in 1911. There are dozens of manufacturers who make dozens of different styles in all kinds of materials for 1911s. These grips are rubber. They have a stiff steel insert inside the rubber that's molded into the rubber. They have the finger grooves already molded into them. On this gun that I tore down for this specific video, they give you a very good, very secure grip on the gun. So you can see here, you know, finger grooves, all that other good stuff. So and then once you pull the screws, they just pop right off. Whoops, I forgot to pull one part out. There we go. Alright, so that's one thing. The second thing you can replace with a minimal amount of work, minimal amount of tools, in fact nothing more than you need to field strip your gun, is the barrel bushing. Again, there are many manufacturers who make aftermarket bushings. Obviously you want to be sure the bushing fits your barrel as tightly as possible. This one has almost no rattle to it at all, which is the way you want it. When the slide locks into battery, this bush, you know, the barrel is going to be like this when the gun's unlocked. As the slide locks into battery, the slide travels forward, taking the bushing with it, and it's going to lock up, you know, a tenth of an inch or a couple hundredths of an inch behind the muzzle. If that barrel is loose or sloppy, it won't put the barrel to the same point every time. So you want to have a good barrel to bushing fit. Again, there are lots of manufacturers, lots of retailers. Midway USA, Brownell is one of my favorites. Wilson Custom Combat. Wilson Custom Combat back in the 90s, 45 1911 upgrade parts were their bread and butter. And they're still pretty much that way today. Something else you can replace when you're field stripping your gun is the slide release. This is obviously an extended slide release. So this is a part you can purchase aftermarket from any number of retailers that should require no gunsmithing. What you need to pay attention to when you purchase it is the size of the hole in the barrel link. If you have a linked barrel, if you have a linkless barrel, it's not something you have to worry about. But make sure it will fit the link in the barrel. That could be some minor fitting, which is just some very fine emery or something like this, a Scotch-Brite pad, and you know, you have to take a little bit of metal off and then it fits. Done. Another part that can be replaced with nothing more than a small screwdriver is your magazine release. On this gun, it is an oversized magazine release where after the magazine release is put into the gun, the oversized button screws into it. Real simple. It's nothing more than a small screwdriver to turn this screw 90 degrees counterclockwise, and it drops right out of the gun. Let me take this off and throw it back in the magnet tray so I don't lose it. And lastly is your plug, spring, and guide rod. Please keep in mind, one of the drawbacks with talking about what you can do to upgrade 1911s, everybody and their brother makes a 1911. Para Ordnance, Colt, Springfield, Smith & Wesson, Rock Island, Sig Sauer, everybody makes a 1911. So I caution you strongly to make sure you're ordering the right parts for the right gun. Don't just go, oh, an extended thumb safety, and order it, because it might be for a Colt and you might have a Sig, or it might be for a Springfield and you might have a Colt. Okay, so please keep that in mind. So this can easily be replaced with a single piece guide rod. Obviously after that you would need a tool to take the guide rod apart so you can field strip your gun, but you don't need a gunsmith to replace this whole loose spring and the plug and the guide rod. And there again, that single piece guide rod adds to the stability of the lockup of the gun when the slide drops back into battery. Combined with the bushing, the guide rod, those are probably the two single biggest things you can do accuracy-wise to accurize your 1911. Now, in the vein of just needing a couple tools, what can you replace? For example, this is the mainspring housing. That slides right into place just like that. This is what provides the palm swell where the gun meets your hand, right here. Okay? These can be replaced. They are simply one pin that you would drive out and the mainspring housing pops right out. Then you put the new one in. I would caution you, however, to buy a complete mainspring housing, because if you have to drive this pin out right here to release that spring, you're not going to have a good day. You know, you've heard me say it many times, gun manufacturers are very fond of using itty-bitty springs that will put a Volkswagen Beetle in orbit. This is definitely one of those springs, although this would probably put a Volkswagen bus in orbit, not a Beetle. So you want to purchase a complete housing with that extended palm swell that you want to make it fit your hand better. What else do we have? The extended thumb safety. Now, this can fall into one of two categories. This can fall into minimal tools required to fit it, or a lot of tools required to fit it. This gun, or this safety, has an underlug right here that needs to be cut. You can see where the screwdriver is just bouncing back and forth between those, at least I hope you can. Some safeties come with a lug that isn't cut, and you basically have to pull the old safety out and then get a Dremel or a file and some stones and then cut this underlug to the proper radius and the proper depth. So that could require some very precise fitting and some very precise metal removal. If you take too much away, you could compromise the integrity of the part and compromise the function of what this part is supposed to do, especially since it's a safety. Because this lug has to go through this hole right here and block the sear from moving and the trigger. So this could fall into one of two categories. In keeping with the minimal tools required, something else you can do from a reliability standpoint or reliability of feeding is what they call throat and polish the gun. If you look right here, at least I'm hoping you can see that this is pretty highly polished right here. This is the part of the frame that meets up with the barrel, and then the magazine sits right in here. The nose of the bullet is going to contact this part of the frame and this part of the barrel. So you can get a Dremel and some jeweler's rouge and polish that till it shines. And that is probably the biggest thing you can do with minimal parts to enhance the reliability of your gun. Obviously, when you polish something, you're taking all the little bumps and whatnot on the surface away, and you're making it a surface with less friction. So, I know I got a 45 round laying here on the bench. There we go. So when you've got this big old round nose bullet right here, and it just slides across that metal that you've polished, it's coming up out of the magazine and feeding into the barrel more reliably. There's no friction there to hold it back or make it jump or make it do something else. I will caution you, the one thing you want to do is make sure you are removing as little metal as possible. In that vein, I'm a big fan of this right here. Blue Magic Headlight Lens Restore. This will put a finish on a piece of metal like you would not believe. It will polish it to mere brightness. I was astounded when I tried it. I tried it on a piece of raw steel, and I couldn't believe what I ended up with. So this is really good for doing exactly that. You soak one of those cotton Dremel tips in it and just go to town. Polishes that right up. Getting into the more knowledge and more specialized tools area, where you're going to need jigs. You're going to need a jig, and you're going to need stones of varying grits. You can buy an adjustable trigger. Some of the adjustable triggers will have two little tabs right here that you can bend out. That is to adjust the take-up of the gun. It doesn't allow the trigger, once you bend those tabs out, it doesn't allow the trigger to move all the way forward, so you have less take-up on the gun. Something else you can do is a trigger channel stone, where right here is the channel where the trigger rides in. See if I can put this in right this time. There we go. Just like that, you can see where that, hopefully you can see where that rides. You can see how freely that moves. What that trigger channel stone is for is because these are machined, and they're machined in bulk, and they do try and get everything out of it. What you can do is get a trigger channel stone and just run that stone through the channel on each side of the frame, and that will remove any burrs, slowly grinds them down, like doing anything with a stone, just like sharpening your knife. It'll slowly grind them down and remove any burrs that the trigger could be dragging on. With that same stone, if you can move a knife edge or something around these holes in here, and you feel any burrs, you can take those burrs off as well. Finally, and lastly, what you can do with a fairly expensive part that's only good for doing one thing, and some stones that are good for doing a lot of different things with guns. When I say stones, I mean sharpening stones, basically. India stones, ceramic stones that are specific sizes for a specific purpose when dealing with these guns. That is the full-blown trigger job. And what that entails is, if you look, this is the hammer out of this gun with the strut. There are 2 notches in the hammer right here. This is the half cock notch, and we're not going to worry about that. This is the full cock notch. That engages the sear just like that. And these edges are only a couple 10,000ths of an inch high, as well as this edge on the sear right here. There is a jig you can buy from Brownells, Midway, Wilson Custom, you know, anywhere you buy your gun parts from, for maintaining the proper angle when you stone this sear to polish it. And basically what you do is you take the sear, you put it in the jig with the pin just like that, and it holds it in the jig, and you run a stone across the jig. And the jig does come with instructions, and that will cut the face of the sear to the proper angle. And then you just break this corner right here so there's no burrs. And when I say break the corner, what I mean is you just take the stone and run it across it at a different angle, and that'll basically grind down off the burrs or grind off any burrs that you made by cutting the sear to the proper angle. And then take a different stone and make sure that the full cock notch is at a 90-degree angle and it's nice and polished and smooth. That way, when you depress the trigger, see if I can hold this so you can see it, the trigger comes back, hits this part right here, bumps that out of the way, and the trigger, or the hammer rather, goes forward, the slide comes and recocks and catches it on this little notch right here, just like that. So that's the full-blown trigger job. When I do a trigger job for someone on a 1911, basically what I do is completely disassemble the gun. I run the stone through the trigger channels. I will polish, if the sear does not need to be recut, I'll polish the face of the sear and break the angle, make sure that's good. I'll polish the notches on the hammer and make sure they're clean and free of burrs. I will just run the stone over any sharp edges right here that may or may not have a burr. Run the stone over where this is the disconnector. Run the stone over the sides here to make sure there are no burrs. Run the stone over the sides of the hammer where the safety actually goes through. Run the stone over that to make sure there's no burrs on any of the ends. That way it's not catching inside the frame. I'll completely deburr the inside of the frame around all these holes right here. If the trigger has a take-up adjustment, I'll adjust it to what the customer wants, and then reassemble the gun, check it, make sure it fits, make sure it's the way the customer wants it, call them and tell them it's done. So that's pretty much what you can do with the 1911, going from minimal tools, no tools required, such as the parts you can pull out just by field stripping the gun, like the bushing, the slide release, the guide rod, to minimal tools, the magazine release with just a small screwdriver, to the mainspring housing with a punch and a bench block, to this where you may or may not need a Dremel and files and stones, a Dremel and some jeweler's rouge to throat and polish the frame and barrel so they are just about a glass finish. going like that and nice and real smooth, to a full-blown trigger job where you're using some very specialized tools for the jig to stone the sear and make that work. And the last thing I want to mention that you can upgrade on just about any gun are sights. So on this gun, hopefully you can see that both the front and the rear sight, both the front and the rear on this gun are dovetails. So with a simple sight pusher, or if you're gutsy enough and you have something like some soft vice jaws that can be put in a vise, neoprene rubber, and hold the slide, you can actually tap these out with a punch and a small hammer. But if you look at this one, that looks like the front sight is just sitting there on top of the slide. It's not a dovetail. This is what's called a staked front sight. So let's talk about dovetails for just a second, and then we'll get to the stake sight. If you have dovetails, it is definitely in your best interest, and you want to change the sights yourself, it is definitely in your best interest to contact the manufacturer and find out what dovetail they used, because there is a GI cut dovetail, there is a Bomar cut dovetail, and there's 3 or 4 different ones. So that is definitely something you need to know before you buy the sights you want to put on the gun. As far as this gun, obviously you can see that the rear sight is a dovetail, but the front sight is staked. This requires some very specialized and very expensive tools. Specifically a front sight staking fixture. This sight basically has a metal rod coming down off the, well, it's actually part of the steel that the front sight is made of, that goes down through the slide. That rod, that tongue or tang, has to be compressed into a pocket that's milled into the underside of the slide. That takes considerable force, and it takes a very specialized tool to keep this in place on top of the slide, and then to crush that steel tang into the pocket. Then it needs to be ground flush. Once it's really compressed in there, if there are any edges, it needs to be ground flush. So you're also going to need a Dremel for that. So that's the last thing that I wanted to talk about on 45s, is replacing the sights. Front sight pushers, bloody hell. I have a universal sight pusher tool. It was almost $300. The front sight staking fixture that I use when I'm building 1911s or working on them or changing sights, that was $139. One tool, $139 just to do front sights, staked front sights on 1911s. So that is something you need to keep in mind. So in the case of wanting the sights changed, you'd probably be better off taking it to a gunsmith, or taking it to someone like me, a gunsmith, who can change those sights out for you with a modicum of damage and pretty much the right tools for the right job. Oh, that's it for this edition of the Basement Gun Shop. I want to thank my buddy Greg Calkins for texting me and saying, hey, what can I do with my 1911s that doesn't require me paying a smith? And for helping me out with an idea for Basement Gun Shop, because coming up with all this stuff, it requires some brain work, and sometimes my brain's not working, especially on a holiday weekend. So thanks again, Greg. So if you have any questions or comments, I encourage you, by all means, write down there. Please leave them in the comments section. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got some good information. If you liked it, like the channel, subscribe, even better. And until next time, stay safe, keep shooting. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.